All right, so I have the absolute pleasure of speaking with Vivek Ramasamy today. We've heard you unpack about the threat of wokeness, ESG, the threat of China, and even big tech collusion with the government to censor Americans. But I'd like to take a step back and turn a little bit towards the future for a moment. And I want to start off with this question. Is there hope for America?
I believe there is. And you want to know why? The American ideals that brought together a divided, headstrong group of people 250 years ago, those ideals still exist. We just have to rediscover them. Basic rules of the road, ideas like merit, the idea you get ahead in America, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character. The idea that the best ideas win when no ideas are censored, that we should apply merit in who gets into this country, who gets ahead in this country, that we should be able to debate each other as neighbors as long as we each get the same courtesy in return. The idea that the people who we elect to run the government, by the way, here's one for you, are the people who actually run the government. These are basic rules of the road that if most Americans look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves, do they agree with those basic ideas? I think most Americans absolutely do. Most Americans think their neighbors and their teammates and their colleagues do too, but they're just not sure anymore because they're not allowed to talk about it. So I think if we're able to break down those conversational barriers, let the exchange of ideas and the culture of courage over fear flow again in this country, then I think we're on a hair's trigger away from a domino effect, a national revival in this country of the kind we saw in 1980. America was in a last national identity crisis in the late 70s. That's what created the conditions for Reagan and others to lead a national revival. I think that's the kind of moment we live in today, too. It's communist China rather than communist USSR. Some differences that make that more complicated, and we can get into that. We depend on that enemy for our modern way of life. That makes this time around a lot harder. But with the right leaders being able to shore up our national identity here at home, to answer the question of what it means to be an American in 2023, if we can do that, then I'm actually convinced that we're not in some inevitable national decline and that our best days are actually, not in some sort of canned, cheesy kind of way, but actually, truly ahead of us. I actually believe that deep in my bones, and that's part of why I'm frankly so passionate about having conversations like this one to help make it happen.
I would just like to briefly touch on the government tech censorship because I know you've spoken extensively on that. And how is free speech online going to be involved in this future for America?
Yeah, so I would say online and offline. I think we got to view both of those as a common problem. So on the internet, what's the government doing? They're pressuring companies in Silicon Valley to do their dirty work. I wrote about this in the pages of the Wall Street Journal over 3 years ago. It was over 2 years ago. At the time, it was dismissed by some as a conspiracy theory. Now it's just plain as day reality. I think if it's state action in disguise, then as I often say, the Constitution still applies. And that means companies ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the Constitution when they're doing the government's dirty work. Take government protection like Section 230C2 that says these companies can take down political speech with impunity and say that if you're protected by the federal government, then you're bound by the same constraints as the federal government, including the First Amendment. But I don't think this is just limited to the online world. If you look at the number of people who have been fired for saying the wrong thing at work, posting the wrong thing on social media, wearing the hat of the wrong political candidate, say President Trump, to work, it's actually staggering. I think it's actually frightening. That's not the culture we want to live in. I think the conservative movement, I don't even think this is a conservative idea, but the conservative movement should get behind it, is to advance the idea that political expression should be a civil right in America. To say that if you can't fire somebody for being black or gay or Muslim or white or Christian or Jewish or whatever, that you should not be able to fire somebody or deplatform somebody just because they're an outspoken conservative or an outspoken liberal, but I say outspoken conservative today because that's actually what's happening. So I think these are relatively basic ideas. They're tangible policy proposals. And I could go on for hours. Probably tens more. But the whole point is these are examples of how we revive those basic principles and rules of the road that answer the question of what it actually means to be American.
But let me ask you this. What do you say to the middle American mom who wants to protect her kids, or the blue-collar worker who just wants to do his job without getting politics shoved down his throat? How can they join the fight to save America?
So look, I think every American has a basic right to speak freely. And I think those Americans ought to have a right to speak freely without fear of putting food on the dinner table if you're that blue-collar worker. without fear of their kids getting a bad grade in school if you're that mom. Yet that's the society we live in today. And that's the new culture of fear that's replaced our culture of free speech in this country. So what can they do? I think we're already seeing the beginning of trends of it. I think parents taking control of the schools that their children go to, including but not limited to through the school boards. People taking control of their retirement dollars to make sure that somebody else isn't abusing it to advance a political agenda through the economy. And then also, bluntly, the democratic process is part of this, electing the kinds of leaders who have the fortitude to do what actually needs to be done, even go to the federal government, shut down half that bureaucracy, if not more of it, that's festering like a national cancer. I think those are the different hats to wear as parents, as family members, as members of a community with a local public school, as a financial participant in capital markets. It's an all of the above approach. And I know people feel rightly like they're not empowered today. Turns out you don't just vote every November, you vote every day with your behaviors, your choices, how you express yourself, even how your dollars are spent. And I think I intend that as an empowering message that if you take the time to understand how many different levers you use to influence our culture every day, I would say use all of them. And we're on the doorstep of a cultural revival for the better in this country.
Well, it has been a pleasure to speak with you, Vivek. Is there any further message that you would like to share with our viewers, or anything that further you wanted to touch on before we go?
Well, I'll just say this in closing. I mean, I say this as a guy who has been on the front lines of fighting wokeism. But as I look in the mirror, what do I really care about? I don't care about defeating some intellectual opponent or even some movement in this country. I care about having a nation left at the end of it. And I just think we're in the middle of this national identity crisis where we as Americans are so hungry for purpose and meaning at a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, like faith or patriotism or hard work or family, these things have disappeared. And a lot of what we see, from wokeism to transgenderism to broader gender ideology to climate change ideology to COVIDism, whatever it is, these are symptoms of a deeper national identity crisis, a deeper void in the heart and soul of our nation. And what we need to do, and I'm speaking to I'm even calling on myself to do better here. What we need to do as a movement, as leaders, is to fill that void with a vision of American national identity, a vision of purpose as a citizen that runs so deep that it dilutes this woke agenda to irrelevance. That is how we win. That is how we have a nation left at the end of it. And one way or another, however I do it, that's what I'm on a mission to do. And I hope every American, I don't care black, white, gay or straight, and I don't even care if it's an R or a D after your name if you're political, if you agree with those basic rules of the road, we're on the same team. We got to do this. Again, it has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. This has been Vivek Ramaswamy. Thank you so much. Thank you.